Back to our team in Washington then, François, Picard, Douglas, Herbert in their position just above the inauguration site. François, Doug, we've heard in many ways what seems perhaps a throwback to another time of politics and a real departure from what the past 4 years have been.
Yeah, and there was plenty of emotion thrown into it, Mark. What with, as you mentioned, that youth poet laureate Amanda Gorman, just before her country music legend Garth Brooks with his a cappella version of Amazing Grace, and the speech by Joe Biden. As Kedevan was saying just a moment ago, he did not duck and away from the issues at hand. He listed the four big ones that his presidency faces on day one: COVID, climate change, political extremism, and white supremacism. He named it, and he said at the outset of his speech, Douglas Herbert, we have learned again that democracy is fragile, democracy is precious, and democracy has prevailed.
And it has prevailed. You know, it's interesting you mentioned, I don't think I've ever heard a president in an inaugural address talk about white supremacy in America. Joe Biden was motivated to run, he says, for the presidency after that white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, the one that became so infamous, the one in which Donald Trump commented that there were very fine people on both sides, one of those sides being white supremacists and overt neo-Nazis. What struck me, I think, about this speech is, the contrast, right? 4 years ago, another American president spoke about American carnage. Today, essentially what we heard with Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, is a message speaking about American courage and resilience. He said at one point, he made a plea that it is time for us to end this uncivil war, to basically open our souls rather than hardening our hearts. What's fascinating about this is President Joe Biden, have to now give him the title, he did not mention Donald Trump by name once in this inaugural address, yet every single word of this address was a repudiation of every single thing that Donald Trump stood for in the past 4 years. And I imagine that Mike Pence sitting there in that front row must have been very happy to be wearing a mask, because Mike Pence was very much in lockstep with Donald Trump, and he must have, it was a repudiation essentially of everything that he stood for as well. But really a speech very much on the message that Joe Biden has projected from the very beginning of his campaign, one of optimism, one of hope, one of light at the end of the tunnel. Significantly, he didn't talk about a dark winter. A dark winter might seem overly pessimistic. He wanted to inject at least a measure of optimism into this speech. He used the term a winter of peril, suggesting that, yes, we are in treacherous times right now. Still more uncertainty, more difficulty lies ahead, François. Yeah. But it's not a dark winter, but a winter of peril, and Americans are resilient enough to transcend it and to live another day.
Yeah, a winter of peril and significant possibilities, he says.
Yeah.
And perhaps one of the most moving parts of that speech was when he called on everyone to hold a moment of silent prayer for those who've succumbed to COVID.
And right away stepping into his new shoes as what we were talking about earlier, as being the empathizer in chief, the griever in chief. Let's remember this has been a country without a chief executive who really seemed endowed with the power to empathize, or at least if he was able to, he never did so really publicly, especially on one of the biggest crises to face America in both modern and not so modern history, the coronavirus pandemic. So that moment of prayer, that acknowledgement of the massive loss in America, the struggles, the suffering of millions of Americans, not just economically, but spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, that was a major, significant milestone in this inaugural address, and a major departure, among many others, from his predecessor's tone and his predecessor's style.
All right, and if you're just joining us here on France 24, yes, Joe Biden has been sworn in as the 46th President of the United States just a short while ago. It's an inauguration ceremony like none we've seen in the midst of a pandemic, with a U.S. Capitol under lockdown after the storming of it by Trump supporters earlier this month. Joe Biden taking the oath, in fact, on the same scaffolding where that had been climbed by those rioters. And right now, though, the sun has come out. It's a cold winter Wednesday in Washington.
It's a crisp cold.
and we have not all, but most of the trimmings of a normal inauguration day. Later on, we're going to see right now some ceremonial decrees that are going to be signed by the new president. That's part of the tradition, but there are going to be more important decrees that are going to be signed later in the day.
Absolutely. Joe Biden is going to literally hit the ground running with a slew of executive orders on this first day. The beginning of a process by which he is essentially going to undo as much of his predecessor's legacy as possible, undo as much of the Trump footprint, if you will, in terms of rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, lifting that travel ban on mostly Muslim nations, imposing a federal mask mandate on all federal property throughout the U.S., going back to the theme of basically acknowledging the ravages of the coronavirus pandemic. That is an absolutely major theme, and the list goes on of the executive orders. But Joe Biden, like we know, he will have a Congress on his side. He will have a bare majority in the Senate, which will give him control of the full two chambers of Congress. However, he will still need the help of Republicans in passing a lot of legislation and in getting his nominees confirmed. Executive orders can do a little bit, but they can't do everything. On a lot of measures that Joe Biden, in his ambitious agenda to unravel the Trump legacy, is going to need the help of Congress. And in some cases, on a lot of votes, you'll need 60 senators, meaning that if you have that majority with Kamala Harris casting a tie-breaking vote, you'll still need at least 10 Republican senators to come over to the Democratic side. So it's going to be a very tough lift for Joe Biden. And from day one.
And as promised, the U.S. president now signing